Hello and welcome to a special presentation for Hodinkee Radio. My name is James Stacey, and today we're taking a special deep dive into the world of the Porsche Design Chronograph 1. This is one era of that chronograph, and all of these watches were brought to us today by my new friend Drew Peterson. A pleasure to have you. Thanks for bringing your watches.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. It's completely a surreal moment. I remember, watching the first Talking Watches with John Mayer and kind of being in awe of his table. I mean, that pulsation dial Daytona I dream about.
Oh, sure.
And, I'm so thankful for what you guys and your whole organization has done for this community and kind of really, brought it all together. It's really an amazing thing and forever changed this hobby and culture.
Oh man, our pleasure, of course, and a huge thank you to Porsche Design, who helped kind of connect us and make this chat possible, and to you for bringing in all these amazing watches. I'm curious, this is a very specific thing we're looking at here. Yep. These are Orfina era chronograph ones from Porsche Design. How does one get started, and how does it eventually lead to this?
Well, so my journey into watches is a little bit long and twisted. I used to sell sneakers and ended up working at a sneaker store called Stadium Goods.
Okay.
And was an intern there actually. And funny enough, all these kind of heavy hitter sneaker clients came in wearing crazy watches, and I started to get really interested, and realized, if you learn, the nitty gritty and the knowledge within watches, you can really find it's an inefficient market and find stuff that's like no one else knew. And largely the beginning of that was with these. And, Orfina specifically, I got really into as I went along my watch journey. My father actually was given this watch in high school by his father. And, as a kid, I remember seeing him wear this all the time. So as I started to get more and more into watches and more love with that research and idiosyncrasies within them, I naturally gravitated towards these. And, their cool factor, is just amazing. Top Gun watch, this is the exact Top Gun watch, funny enough. I can imagine, any pilot wearing these, like inverted and F-16, like pulling 7 Gs.
Sure.
Is pretty damn cool. Also, a lot of these, as we'll discuss later on, especially the Tigers, have a lot of military history, both, engraved into them literally and figuratively. What I think is so much fun is like, who knows what the pilot wearing these flying Tigers was doing, or, the German soldier wearing this bund. God knows what their missions were. And I think that's so much fun to be able to kind of, owning these, you're kind of almost a part of that history. And you got to get to imagine, what life these watches had before you. Probably a much greater life than...
Maybe a more exciting one than but now they've come home. They're in with the right wrist, as it were. This is a watch that I really love, especially aesthetically. I love the history and now the renewed connection to Porsche, in the automotive side. But it's a watch that's kind of clouded by a lot of stories and tales and unknown production from various generations. And I think what you've brought us here today is a collection that paints a very specific picture for a certain time for Porsche design.
Yes, absolutely. I think the Orfina Porsche design, was produced throughout the 70s. And it switched from a Valjoux-based movement here to Lemania-based movements as we go down the line. And I think the history is largely unwritten, and these watches are largely underappreciated. You compare it kind of to the era within the early 2000s of kind of vintage sport models. And like people on vintage Rolex forums or people on military watch forums being like, what's an underline dial?
Yeah.
What's a mil sub? What's a coma? And like people are trying to figure that out. And, I think that largely resembles what we are in now of that era of kind of there's a lot of unknowns. Collectors are trying to really hunker down and really kind of get academic with these watches, which hasn't been done before.
Right. And I'm curious because part of the academic pursuit of this is something that you've taken on in learning about these watches and trying to access some of the secrets of their history in the past and that sort of thing. I'm assuming that's not how your love for these watches started. You don't usually start at a huge amount of depth. You get there later. How did you first kind of get introduced to these watches? How did the Chronograph 1, hit your radar?
Yeah, well, funny enough, so this is a Valjoux 7750 1 mile. And I remember my dad as a kid wearing this on his wrist every day. This was like his love and pride and joy. And eventually when I graduated, he passed some of these on to me. And this watch is, I think it's very binary, these watches. You're either a car person or you're a watch person. You're one of the, no one's walking in a store and being like, oh, like, let me just grab an Orfina Porsche Design off the wall. Like, you really have to either love watches.
Thing.
Yeah. So I really got into these through that, and then, started to realize that, as we were discussing, the unwritten history is there, and, it's to be discovered. And I love research. I love diving into little idiosyncrasies of these watches, and kind of spiraled from there, probably a little bit out of control.
I mean, yeah, you're definitely, flirting with the envelope here, I think, in terms of fascination with kind of one specific model. What about these, and maybe if we start over here, what about these have those details that really called to you? Why would they be part of a collection of chronograph ones?
Well, so largely, my main interest as we go down the table is the military. Military history is both like literally and figuratively engraved into these watches. And that is like, what were the missions, people carried out wearing these? Like, I find that fascinating. These fighter pilots from the 23rd Tactical Fighter Group were deployed to Vietnam. Like, who knows what these watches saw? Mm-hmm. But going down the line, we have the Valjoux 7750. This was the first movement that Orfina Porsche Design used. When Ferdinand Porsche was starting, he ended up partnering with, in 1972, he started Orfina Porsche Design, and ended up partnering with a racer that he knew, who actually ended his career racing for Porsche, funny enough, who had bought Orfina, and tasked Orfina with making the watches. He designed it, Orfina made them. And they used the Valjoux movement for their first ones. This was the first watch it was used in. This is the first all-black watch. Most people think that all of these are PVD. Most of them are. The early ones are powder coat. But this is the first, and how you can kind of see from the 7750s to the 7176s and the Lemania-based movements is at the 12 o'clock, you have a 24-hour totalizer, and then you have a 30-minute kind of counter on the Valjoux. You also have a central minute hand. If we press this, you'll see a central minute counter. So this is going to go around in 60 seconds.
Which is kind of the hallmark feature of this movement.
The hallmark feature of the Lemania
Very
movement.
cool.
Exactly.
Think about a chronograph that has your normal seconds, running seconds, but the minutes are read just like a normal minute hand.
And you'll see, that is one of the major differences. And then as we go on to the 7176s and 7177s, the Lemania-based movements, we have a black and a silver 7176. This was PVD at this point, and then you have kind of a bead blasted silver. It's really, really cool finish, actually kind of my favorite. And you have tachometer scales on these. And then as you move on to the 7177s, which are the military-based movements, you have a couple differences. So that central minute hand ended up turning into a little plane.
It's such a cool looking watch.
From a little lollipop, it's really cool. And you also have a 3H on the dial to signify the use of tritium. Which, as I'm sure many people know, kind of radiation and watches are a mysterious, kind of intertwined, somewhat dangerous history at a certain point. And then you also have a 12-hour riot, or 12-mark riot, versus your standard tachometer scale. But, the military then kind of, there's three main, I think, parts to signify within a lot of these watches. And that's first the movement, so Valjoux 7750 versus Lemania 5100. Then you go into PVD, and you have kind of 5 variations. Earliest black were powder coat, they weren't PVD. Then you have regular black, then you have silver, then you have anthracite gray, then you have pewter, and you have olive green. Then you go into kind of reference variations within the Lemania-based movement. So you have 7176s, and then you have 7177s. And 7177s are all found here on the right side as military-based watches. The Tigers were made for the U.S. Air Force's 23rd Tactical Fighter Group, and they were nicknamed the Flying Tigers. And they are the only group within the U.S. Air Force that's allowed to fly with the shark teeth on the nose of their plane.
Sure.
And they actually were formed 10 days after Pearl Harbor. Ended up flying immensely throughout World War II. Were a really deadly force, were a really, really powerful force, and ended up regrouping and flying for about 7 or 10 months in Vietnam, based out of Thailand, providing support for ground troops in Vietnam.
And that was they were running A-10s at the time?
They were running A-10 War Dogs, which is just, I think, like the coolest plane, like one of Patriot, just so damn cool.
Really cool plane.
So these were all issued by them. We have a couple idiosyncrasies between them. Mainly that, to my knowledge, they were all issued in silver. You do see black ones. A lot of these cases are interchangeable.
It's a question for you from the collector side of this community. Obviously, the core, the foundational identity of the Chronograph 1 is with a black case and bracelet. Yeah. Is it weird if you prefer, like you mentioned, you like the silver tone ones, the bare steel or whatever, and that's always been my preference. But I can't even necessarily say why, because the anthracite is something quite special. I've seen the olive green, which is unreal in person. Why do you? Is it like a thing in the community to have what kind of a choice between one or the other, or?
I mean, most people will say kind of the quintessential black is their favorite, right? It's the first PVD watch. It's their all-be-all Top Gun cool factor. But for me, the PVD can kind of get annoying. It can get scratched up. I like to wear my watches. You can see all of them are banged up and scratched. But for me, the Tigers are kind of my love. They originally came in silver. I love those. But also, the finish is really interesting. It's like you don't see a lot of watches in this like bead blasted. Mm-hmm. It's weird because it's not a polish. It's just a very interesting finish that I find really attractive, and I think really paints the dimensions of these watches well.
You could definitely see these in the cockpit of a plane.
100%.
They just make sense.
Yeah, I mean, like inverted. Have you seen the Top Guns, giving the bird?
Of course.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. You could see these, inverted, like looking at the Tiger logo, trying to time your 24-hour. These are a real treat for me. And again, their history being largely unwritten, it's been a ton of fun to speak with other collectors in the community to try to figure out, what actually is correct on these, what details them, how they changed over time. These watches were made, mainly or throughout the 70s, mid-70s, 75, 76, the Valjoux went out of production amidst the quartz crisis. And they transitioned to the Lemania 5100-based movements, and then you started to see kind of these civilian ones emerge first, then the military, and then you have a lot of these special editions.
What is the task to get one of these, let alone 4? Is this something where like I could start today and have one in a month, or?
Well, I actually have 6,
a year,
but 2 aren't here. So, but the funny thing is these a lot of these were like eBay finds or weird auction finds, a lot in Europe. And everyone I saw for like 5 years, I bought. And it was just it was nuts. I was like, I need it.
You're cornering the market.
And I certainly. And I'm sorry if anybody didn't get one because of that. But in going after these, I think the hardest hunt was, you would see variations in these. And as we're discussing is the history of these is largely unwritten. You'll see one here without the U.S. Air Force logo. You'll see one with the U.S. Air Force logo. You'll see some with Orfina signed crowns. You'll see some with Porsche Design signed crowns. The hard part is kind of creating an internal thesis to buy these and figure out what's right. And kind of what you realize is that, there's a mix of, it can't have an Orfina down, it can't have a Porsche Design crown. I remember there's been when I bought my last one, for my first one, you could bid on these and you would have no competition. Last one, by the end, people would wait till the end and try to snipe you, and you could start seeing these. And now one of these pops up a year and it's gone in 2 days. Yeah. Or 2 pop up a year. So certainly become much, much more difficult to find and much, much more appreciated, especially these. I think our people are starting to realize either the history of these, the history of Orfina Porsche Design. Maybe they just enjoy Top Gun too. I'm not quite sure, but
all good reasons.
But yeah, I mean, they were, over the years, they were far and few between. They're far and few between, and you had to jump on it when you found one, and I tried to as much as I can. I mean, this one especially, I'm really proud of. It's a fully new old stock version, has case back sticker.
Gorgeous.
I mean, it's beautiful, and you can see this original. I think you asked before is why do I prefer the silver? I mean, it's just this finish.
I love the way the
cool.
light hits it.
It's just
it's
damn
so
cool.
cool.
It's it's almost like a PVD, but it's not. And finding one like this, I don't know. I mean, maybe the guy ordered it. Was it issued to him? Was it handed in an envelope? Who knows? But it's certainly fun to find and have. I guess we could go and speak on these. Or
I'm curious. I definitely want to get to these. I can't stop looking at a couple of. They're just really gorgeous watches and so distinctive. But I am really curious. I think a huge portion of the sort of watch enthusiasm world for the last 20 years has really benefited on the work that probably 50 people did to build up forums about Rolex and Omega and military watches and even things like WatchUseek. And of course, there was a time certainly that Time Zone was probably the home for most watch information online, and certainly the people talking about it. What is the process like in this decade to be trying to go back and link things up and develop? I assume you do a lot, like in terms of when things were produced and for how long and for how many, like that kind of stuff.
I mean, a lot of it is trial and error, and there's no guidebook on these, which makes it fun, but also a little scary. A lot of it's going back and like reading forum articles from 2008 and 2007, 2006, and these kind of early, like trying to find the pictures through Wayback Time Machine on these forums, trying to figure it out. It's a lot of it's speaking with other collectors. This Royal Navy over here is, an interesting case color I haven't seen otherwise. Maybe it's a new PVD, maybe it's not. I was speaking with the collector last week about it, and we're kind of trying to figure was it aged differently? Is it a one-off? Is it a prototype? I don't really know. It's damn cool though.
It is.
And it looks sick. So,
And for the NATO nerds, an absolutely pristine Phoenix. I just love it.
Yeah.
So nice to see.
Yeah.
These are so cool, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So of these ones, what would kind of stand out as like the lesson learned or the reason you might try and hunt one of these down?
Well, I mean, lesson learned, these are really cool. So this one's a Bund issued variant. So this was issued, all of these are, especially the militaries, people say sometimes quasi issued, meaning were they ordered by, the defense.
You weren't handed one in an envelope and told to get to work.
Yeah, it wasn't the MOD and these mil subs, but these supposedly were. Just like that. You were handed one and say, go get to work.
Yeah.
And you look on the back, you have your NSN number, your issued number. And these were issued to the German military or their military defense force. And they came on these original straps, which I just think is so, so amazing. Finding these with the correct case backs and like, who knows, who was issued this or where it was, it's a ton of fun. And then you move on, you have the NATO issued variant, which all came in these anthracite PVD cases, these interesting kind of, it's almost a greenish gray. I've never seen another PVD in that color. And those are super, super cool. And then you have a kind of a brand new black on this this is supposedly the original shape, like the thin.
Oh, I see, rather than more contoured.
Versus these came maybe later.
Okay.
We're still not sure, but that's the guess. And this one especially is really vibrant orange. Some of these, this is a new old stock Tiger that I found. It still has the case back sticker. And like you see, some of these, you just have this really vibrant orange. Maybe they weren't worn, maybe they were produced differently, I don't know. But I mean, it's just a real attractive, bright, you could very easily see this in the middle of the night at a cockpit.
Oh, I would think so, yeah. I think the other thing that stands out, especially if you're lucky enough to sit in front of this sort of collection, is the kind of myriad ways that they've made small changes to the dial layout and where the fonts are, where the text might be. You've got this one has this absolutely incredible NATO signature, Royal Navy here, obviously the Tiger logo. The watches really, they stick to a few things that are super common, of course, across it. The bright orange accents for the seconds hand. The coloring of the lume is all very static across all of these, which I think is pretty remarkable.
Yep.
And then on top of that, you have, like you said, these ones that have the 3H for the use of tritium. And I think they really do lead themselves to a certain type of collectability where everything's kind of very close to each other, but there's little kind of fun elements.
I mean, you'll see, some of them have Porsche Design bracelets. Some will have.
And so is this a powder coat? Is that why it's a much more like sort of matte?
So these are all PVDs. The powder coat will look like, it's a little almost bubbly.
Okay.
And it'll chip more so. These are all PVD, but the PVD changed over time. Kind of with sweat and grime. You kind of have, I guess, what people refer to as like sleeve polish.
Yep.
Wearing it. So
when you've got some nice like edge details on this, which is what I'm used to seeing from PVD of that age group, or even now with PVD on a more inexpensive watch, you'll wear away 100%. With the edges.
Not the DLC or the new coating of the reissue.
Just stay on,
and then you also see kind of idiosyncrasies of, let's see if I can, this is an Orfina versus a Porsche Design. At some point, Porsche Design stopped giving the licensing to Orfina for the Orfina bracelets, so they switched to these. Some people say these were the original bracelets they came on. You also then have some that came on what's a stretch bracelet.
Oh, cool.
Which is really fun, right? Versus a standard pin.
I had a bracelet very similar to that on a Breitling Aerospace.
Yeah.
Which had the bullet style bracelet with the extension on it. It's great.
It's really fun.
So
except you're just worried the spring's going to snap one day.
Terrified, of course. Yeah. And then this is an entirely different bracelet altogether.
So Orfina was sold in the 90s to a new owner who kind of bought the name and trademark. And since then, he's kind of produced some different variants. of bracelets and of some cases and XYZ. This was one of them. It's kind of this beads of rice, interesting bracelet, but I think it's really fun. This watch originally came on this, and I kept it. And you rarely see them on this, and when you do, I just think it's kind of a cool, factor. You have a slide inside too.
Oh,
I mean, it's fun. Who designed these and put them on? I don't know. I mean, it's someone at Orfina, but it's definitely really, really cool and really fun. You also have different crown signatures over the years. You have Orfina versus Porsche Design. Again, through service, or if these were issued earlier versus later, you'll have those idiosyncrasies between them. But yeah.
And what would it take today if you're cruising around on the forums, maybe in a very busy WhatsApp thread or something like that? What would get you excited? What would be is there like a white whale of information? Would it be like a book from somebody's desk in Stuttgart
I don't have
it had
one.
every number? Or?
So I probably shouldn't be saying this on Hodinkee, but if one of you guys takes it, I'm gonna be real angry. There's a Swiss shield Orfina Porsche design that was made for the Swiss military. I've seen one come up over the years. This other collector in Greece has like 4. And I don't know where he got them. I've been trying to get one. I haven't gotten one. But it's a Swiss shield. It was made for the Swiss military. And it's literally like a Swiss shield flag looking. I mean, it's like really damn cool.
In the same sort of position.
In the same sort of position.
That is cool.
It is cool. So that's the one I don't have. That's the one I would like to get. Eventually, hopefully, I will get one. I think I'm done with tigers a little bit for now. That was originally my first love.
Yeah, at this point, you might as well also get yourself a Warthog.
I would love to. If the U.S. Air Force wants to send me one, I'm happy to trade.
You got to drink it off Pepsi, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find a lot of this stuff really fascinating. And the other side, we spoke on the phone before this. The other side, we were talking about this sort of the progressive development of the understanding of these and the history and filling in the blanks and that sort of thing. Are there any you've got some sort of an audience here. Are there any great mysteries out there that just are a chunk of time, a watch that nobody can explain, or anything like that?
Well, I think one of the interesting questions is how were these originally issued? So we know for a fact because the buns have an NSN number, they were fully issued. There's a question of who were these tigers ordered by? Who were these NATOs ordered by? Who were these Royal Navies ordered by? Some say this was a test watch for the MOD, and this watch was ordered by them. They ordered a batch of 20,
Which
50,
is that's a reasonable theory. They do that kind of thing.
But we don't know. So that's a big question. If someone could have service records or pull that out, that would be amazing. A couple collectors and I, what we're going to do is we're going to get together and we're working on starting kind of a 5513 matte dial kind of site, which are reference points for these watches to try to give kind of a firm history and a firm understanding to be able to kind of establish a lineage for these watches and establish kind of a firm backdrop for them. Other big mysteries are, again, this might be a new PVD coating. It's different than a lot of the ones we've saw. There's also pewter and olive green coatings. There's a question of how do those vary? We've also, speaking with the collector last night, like this bracelet's a different finish than this bracelet. And there's a question of you can see it's much more matte and then this one's much more gloss. And there's a question of what changed over time? These watches were made in an 8 to 10 year span, and there's a question of, and Orfina kept on making these parts afterward. There's a question of, there was PVD production changed. People's, the movements changed, obviously from Valjoux to Lemania. The processes changed. So, there was a lot of switching. It wasn't like, all of this was outsourced. These watches weren't made in-house like the new reissue was by Porsche. These were made by a brand, then were sent out to get coated. And, over a span as people stopped being able to produce or stopped being able to coat these watches, you start to have production change. That's a real question mark.
I'm also curious, with the popularity of watches in general, there must have been an increase in the profile of chronograph ones in the last decade, of course.
Absolutely.
Is it to the extent where you're scared of Franken watches, fakes, like the stuff that plagues a lot of the popular side of the collector market?
I mean, it's funny enough, I just ordered a couple bracelets on eBay and I got them and they weren't real. So people have started to make fakes. I mean, you'll see the original fakes had instead of for the NSA manufacturing, it's easier to see on a silver. For the NSA manufacturing bracelets, you'll see kind of in the middle there, the S will be a 5. Okay. And then words will be misspelled. and the originals were misspelled, so they were easy to spot. Now the spelling mistakes are fixed, and now it's a finishing. So yeah, they are fakes. I mean, you'll see fake crowns, you'll see fake pushers, you'll see fake hands. I mean, largely who service these stills, there's a little service center called Superior Watch in Brooklyn, and a guy named Jack Friedman runs it. And he's been the authorized service center since these were new in the US. That's cool. I mean, it's a pretty amazing story. And you go in and, you're in the back of his shop and he's pulling parts off the wall. I mean, it's really like a New York kind of like this old watchmaker who has just this treasure trove of parts. And he knows a lot of these, but even for him, some of these parts are getting really, really hard to discover. So yes, they have. And people definitely have to be wary. When I first started buying these 6 or 7 years ago, there was no fakes. I mean, there was just stuff would be switched. Like you might see a silver with a black crown and you're like, what is that?
Or like a dial that probably didn't leave in that case, but all within the family.
All within the family. Yeah. Now that's not really the case. So yeah, I mean, that's why it's important to kind of start a reference base because, if we don't, I think as these get more valuable and as these watches start to get, start to appreciate, as I'm not saying to the same degree, but as kind of the vintage sport models did in the early 2000s to today, there's going to be people trying to, I think, take advantage of the community and these watches largely.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I'm always fascinated by when a specific watch or a brand hits a profile where suddenly there's the opportunity to form some more nefarious ways of moving through the market. But
and that's why I'm happy. I mean, Porsche did this reissue. It's in titanium. It's a beautiful, beautiful, in-house movement. You have an English and a German date wheel. Yep. In the case of yours, you have a Japanese and an English date wheel. I mean, it's pretty damn cool. They did a fantastic job. So I'm happy to see, while I love the vintage ones, and these are my true love, it's great to see that Porsche now is really caring about these and was willing to put in the work to really design a full kind of remake from the ground up. And they did a terrific job.
I have to agree. And I think that's another point that I wanted to touch on was every time I meet somebody who is into Porsche design, and especially the Chronograph 1, there isn't this it has to be vintage or it has to be new. And I think that, obviously this watch looks nearly identical to other watches on this table. So it's probably an easier space to kind of get into. Like if you look at an early 50s, 60s sports watch and then maybe the modern version, it's going to be bigger and shinier. Yep. And certainly the price has gone up, but I would also say the level of quality, the manufacturing in Solothurn, the strong connection kind of philosophically and all the way through the company to the rest of Porsche has led to a very strong product. And I think they've done some really, really fascinating stuff in the last few years since they sort of fully relaunched the Chronograph 1 a few years ago. Do you have any specific favorites from that run?
So this is the first one. Yeah. They made 500 of. This is kind of in the mid-serial range, and this was my favorite. That they released. There's too many versions to count now. There's been quite a bunch, bit. Yeah. There's a lot, but the first one they came out with is kind of my favorite, and. I think what I'm happy about is like you mentioned, they really stayed true to the character. I think a lot of brands, if they did a reissue, they might change the dial variation.
Yeah, it's a little bigger, it's a little smaller.
I mean, you take an original. I mean, this is kilometers.
So close.
I mean, it's almost. I mean, they did a fantastic job in my eyes.
I do think the new one, you could have tricked somebody who owned one in 72, just swapped it out on their nightstand, and they would probably just put this, aside from it being titanium.
Yeah, I mean, the bracelet's a little bit bigger.
Differently, yeah.
I mean, if someone's as nuts as me, maybe not, but I think I would know. But I wouldn't be sad to have this on. I think they did a terrific job, and it's been fun to see that Manikai version, which is I think in light of the Tigers. And I'm excited to see what comes with them. I'm definitely rooting for them.
Yeah. No, to that point, what would you love to see as a future sort of LE, as somebody who collects a very specific band of these watches and has experience with the modern stuff? What would you love to see? What do you think they haven't done yet?
Well, I think there's two things. One, I would love to see colored PVDs. I mean, if they did a green or if they did an anthracite gray or if they did something funky and fun, maybe even a blue. I mean, it would be damn cool, and I think they could totally do it. Two, I mean, I would love to see if there become issued variants again. I don't think that's going to happen at the new price point, but that would certainly be cool to see and certainly enjoyable to see. But definitely, I mean, I would love to see some more colored PVD variants and see them kind of get funky and fun and kind of tap into the history of these watches largely.
For sure. I would love to see them do a bare metal with the bracelet, in matching bracelet.
Yeah,
they've done some of the bare metals, but with, to be fair, the buns and the click-in straps are all really nice, but I think these are watches that really sing on a bracelet.
I mean, that's the funny thing is actually I was speaking to somebody the other day, is like I was switching, one of these onto a bund to wear for a day or a NATO, and it's like you're like trying to get the bracelet out, and I'm like, I don't want to scratch the case, especially in the black PVD. And you're like, damn it, and then you're like, screw it, all right, do it, and then you scratch it, and you're like, whatever. But with the quick snap, it's really, it makes your life really, really easy, and that's certainly nice to have.
So I think this has been great, and there's probably about 1,000 other avenues that we could follow, diving down this specific rabbit hole. But I'm curious, in sort of a closing manner, for you and your experience in this, what has the kind of progressive scholarship, the understanding of these models, the work to unearth the secrets and that sort of thing, what has that kind of meant to you and to the rest of the people that you connect with in that community?
Well, first, I think a great question. These are largely underappreciated, I think, in that, it reminisces kind of the early 2000s era of vintage Rolex and mill subs and Comex and underlying gilt dials. And you go through old forum articles and you hear these like legendary dealers, collectors, Mike Wood, Jed McCormick, Jeff Hess, another Hodinkee Radio.
Of course, yeah.
And, you see them trying to figure out these quizzes and these puzzles within these watches, and I think these largely resemble a lot of that, and that those watches, mill subs were $5,000. Now they're unaffordable. That kind of question mark, that history was filled over time, but it took a lot of people who were passionate to get together and say, hey, this serial number is right. Hey, this variation's right. Hey, this 60-minute graduated bezel is right if it has X, Y, and Z. And I think that's what we're starting to do here. I just discovered the other day, one of these hash marks that has a crooked 7. It's one of the first 500 militaries.
Okay.
Like weird things like that. Or you look at the shape of the PD logo changing, or tiger variations. Some tigers have U.S. Air Force, some don't. Like you're starting to notice these little idiosyncrasies, and what it takes is a lot of watches from a lot of people who are passionate and been doing this a long time to get together. Mm-hmm. And I'm working with a couple collectors to kind of create this basis, and kind of a similar of a 5513 matte dial, a couple other sites,
right,
to provide that basis to the community. And hopefully, as these watches become more and more appreciated, there's a site and a place for people to go to have a confident kind of basis for their knowledge.
Sure. And if somebody is listening at home and they have a photo of a family member wearing a watch and they know the date, or maybe they've got one of the watches in a drawer but it doesn't run, how could they be part of that conversation? What would be the best way to connect?
Go to orfinaporschedesign.com and you can press the contact button and shoot me an email, or go to BF Motor Club on Instagram and shoot me a message there.
Fantastic. Drew, thank you so much for bringing in your watches.
It
was an absolute treat. And good luck in the hunt. I can't wait to read the coffee book.
Yeah. That's coming eventually.